So have you ever watched a potter spinning clay on a wheel? I was fortunate when I lived in Mendocino County to get to know some potters. And you know, this could be a breathtaking moment of artistry. The clay just changing widths and heights and shapes until it becomes what the potter has envisioned. You can almost get mesmerized just watching the clay go round and round in the artist's fingers, changing it, shaping it. And then there's the way I do pottery. Resembling a destruction derby more than a moment of artistry. Failed attempt after failed attempt in smashing and working the clay back to start all over again until something marginally useful emerges. More smashing and starting over than skillfully shaping. Yeah, I think we all know that even with real potters, the clay can wobble and collapse, and they'll have to get it all started over again. And it's only in those video clips that you see the pot emerging beautifully the first time, every time. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it? You ever wonder what kind of potter God is? You know, we would like to imagine, because God's perfect, that God is this perfect, error-free potter and going to mold us all into what God envisions. But then we get our human experience reminding us that God is working with the most imperfect clay. So Jeremiah resorts to an overt warning. He tells the people about God leading him to visit a potter. And the vessel the potter was attempting to create got spoiled, so the potter reworked it into another vessel as seemed good to him. Potter uses his or her hands carefully and sensitively. It's a delicate matter to shape a clay pot on a wheel. And it's truly the work of an artist. A slight change in pressure or change of mind can result in the pot becoming ruined. Nevertheless, the potter can still turn the clay into something else. Can I not do with you, O house of Israel, just as this potter has done? God tells Jeremiah, just like the clay in the potter's hands, so are you in my hands, O house of Israel. At one moment, I may declare concerning a nation or a kingdom that I will pluck up or break down and destroy it, but if that nation concerning which I have spoken turns from its evil, I will change my mind about the disaster that I intend to bring upon it. The image of a potter is apt, for God is also a creator. Like potters in particular, creators, and the Creator can destroy what they have made and turn the material into something else. You know, there certainly are times when we need to be made into something better. Are you familiar with the Darwin Awards? You can read about them in the news. They're given out every year to people who do something really stupid. My son has some friends who might be nominated, but they never come close. One of the finalists for the award a few years back is a teenager in the hospital recuperating from serious head wounds. Head wounds that he received from an oncoming train. And when he was asked how he received the injuries, the lad told the police, well, he simply wanted to see how close he could get his head to the train before hitting it. Well, he sure found out. I think he's lucky to have a head. I'm glad our teenagers aren't quite so stupid. Sometimes I wonder, how did we live through our teenage years ourselves? Oh. Still, we may not put our head in the way of a train, but we make some destructive choices in our lives, choices that God calls us to account. You know, we read from Jeremiah, and it sounds like one of those smiting passages that lead many Christians to fall into the heresy of Marcionism, saying that we don't believe in the violent God of the Old Testament, as if God was different. Yes. Oh, this is a tough passage. This is a hard passage. Do we not, however? Don't we get angry? Don't we get riled up when we hear about a child being abused? Or an elder who's neglected? Or when the vile rhetoric emboldens racism in our community? We get mad. We get angry. And I hope that we, the faithful, get angry when God's good creation it is being endangered, ruined by our own actions. Earlier in Jeremiah, we read how God was angry over what was going on in Jerusalem and Judea. Similar evils, the greed of religious leaders, false claims about peace in the land, oppressions of strangers in the land, of widows, of orphans, murder, lies, the abandonment of a God who has saved the people in order to follow false gods who really offered nothing of real value. We know, gosh, we're sometimes pretty stupid still. That's not all ancient history. The same things still take place today. And I don't think God's any more accepting of them now than back in Jeremiah's day. So even when we acknowledge Acknowledge, God has good reason to be angry, to rage and threat violence. In this passage we read from Jeremiah, the threats are always accompanied by the offer of a second chance. Twice in this short passage, God says the people still have a chance to avoid punishment if they turn from their evil ways towards God's ways of compassion and justice. God doesn't just throw us on the scrap pile, but longs to continue to mold us and make us and shape us. And you think of the potter and the clay, and it's such an intimate one-on-one kind of thing, and it's just me and God working things out, kind of getting my life straightened, but that's not the biblical view. The biblical view is the potter working with the whole community. We don't get right with God just all by ourselves, but together. So in the letter to a man named Philemon, the Apostle Paul writes, I pray that the sharing of your faith may become effective when you perceive all the good we may do for Christ. In the original Greek of the New Testament, Paul prays the koinonia of your faith may become effective. That's one of the Greek words we should know, just like agape. Koinonia. It can mean sharing, contribution, fellowship, spiritual communion. The question for us is this: how are we shaped by koinonia in the life of the church today? No insignificant term. Koinonia is something we need to understand and implement in our mission and ministry. For starters, koinonia means sharing. Paul's letter to Philemon, it's his only surviving private letter. But it survived because there's a lot we can learn from reading about this conversation. Paul encourages Philemon to forgive a runaway slave and welcome him back, not as a piece of property, but as a brother in Jesus Christ. I pray that the sharing of your faith, writes Paul, may become effective when you perceive the good that we may do for Christ. Paul prays that Philemon will embrace the Christian faith even more deeply, that he will see this runaway slave in a whole new light, no longer as a slave, writes Paul, but as a beloved brother. Such sharing is experienced when American Christians take part in short-term mission trips to countries in the developing world, such as Guatemala or Honduras. And can you imagine how many mission teams it's going to take going month after month and year after year to the Bahamas? There, Americans have a shared experience of the Christian faith with their foreign partners, and they discover the power of faith and hope and love in a very impoverished environment, lives can change through such a sharing of Christian faith, especially when the experience is grounded in good deeds and beneficial relationships. Wait, doesn't that sound like the potter working on that vessel, on the potter's wheel? But koinonia has a more concrete meaning, contribution. In his letter to the Romans, Paul reports that Christians in Macedonia and Achaia have been pleased to share their resources, literally to make certain gifts too, with the poor in Jerusalem. Here, the word koinonia is translated as resources, but it can be translated as contributions or gifts. Not just one-on-one. God's working on molding a whole community as well. And here's where we hear koinonia most often. Koinonia can be translated fellowship. The book of Acts says the first converts to Christianity devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayer. God is faithful, says Paul in his first letter to Corinthians. By him you were called into fellowship with the Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. And John writes in his first letter that we declare to you what has been seen and heard, so that you also may have fellowship with us. And truly our fellowship is with the Father and with the Son, Jesus Christ. Koinonia is fellowship, companionship, friendship, comradeship. You know what? I think unfortunately we use the word too lightly in church circles. We can call downstairs our fellowship hall. Or we can have a fellowship luncheon, which makes fellowship sound like, oh, it's just another one of the social gatherings that folks and communities have. But koinonia is always a much richer form of fellowship. Koinonia refers to what we have in common and what we share as Christian men and women and young people. Says the evangelical scholar John Stott, koinonia expresses what we share in together, what we have received together, what we participate in together. The apostles' teaching and fellowship, the fellowship of God's Son, fellowship with each other and fellowship with God and with Jesus. This is more, so much more than a fellowship lunch. It's what we share together. It's what we received together and what we participate in together as a community. Now, Drew Dick had these observations about church and fellowship. He starts off saying, we're not computers. We need personal connections. We draw life from the sight of a smile, the touch of a loved one, being embraced, feeling someone's hand in ours. These bolster our physiological and psychological health. But such experiences can't be programmed, downloaded, or emailed. He said, I'm not against the internet. My contention is that we have misappropriated a great tool. We have taken artificial communication too far. What possible reprieve can our society have from such pervasive technology? Hoping for the internet to disappear is like betting on 8-track tapes making a comeback. Suppressing technology is futile. We need a community strong enough to resist it and once again to become its master. The only hope, it says, the only hope I see is for a shrinking world and growing loneliness is an ancient establishment, one instituted by a homeless Jew and spread by sandaled feet. By fulfilling its mandate, the church can counter the trend towards isolation and loneliness. It can stand against the tide of hyper-technology to provide shelter from the storm of estrangement. Because the church is where we discover fellowship. The church is where we discover hope. And the truth is we simply can't be molded, shaped, or formed into the image of Christ if our walk with Jesus is superficial. The fellowship has to be deep, meaningful, and real. Our walk has to be deep and intimate if we are going to be transformed by the process. The potter invites us into a fellowship, into koinonia, which is as close as the potter's hand molding a lump of clay. Isn't that what we long for when we talk about walking humbly with our God? How else can we become what God envisions